Tonight's program. This is a reminder that tonight's episode will address mental health and PTSD, which may be sensitive to some of our viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. We remind you to please consult your doctor, your mental health professional, your outreach group, your sponsor, or specialist before adopting any change to your dietary, physical, and/or mental health regime. If you're looking for options to go down with respect to mental health and PTSD, contact SAMHSA, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, at 1-800-662-4357. Again, that's 1-800-662-4357. The service is open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year, and is a confidential free information service for individuals and family members facing such stressors. Also, if you are feeling suicidal crisis or emotional distress and need to be put in touch with a crisis center, call the Suicide Prevention Hotline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. Or go to suicidepreventionlifeline.org. You can also text HOME at 741-741. Those resources also are available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And on that, let's begin. Over the last few weeks, we've been talking about what addiction and codependency has been such a detrimental force to all of us, and how recovery was the way forward. Then 2020 came around, and 2020 has brought its share of its own nuances and things that we've had to deal with, not only those in recovery, but everybody. We have a guest tonight by the name of Ashley Blake, who sees this on a regular basis, as she's been in the field for a while. She'll tell her stories from what she has seen, and we'll take your questions and comments. This is The Venture Forward. Good evening, or good morning, or good afternoon, wherever you may be, and welcome to The Venture Forward. I am John Venturini. I am a recovering addict of overeating, alcoholism, and gambling. And I have a lot of things to say about our topic tonight from two different perspectives. I think the first perspective is what something like this year has done to my story, but moreover, what this has done to so many. And there are two very different sides of the coin there. And we have someone that's going to talk about what she has seen in a couple of minutes. I think the thing that I hold very true to myself is I know what the old world used to be for me. And I know I cannot go back to that. But also, I know there are a lot more things on the line with respect to not only myself, but my friends and my family, that there really is no point to go back to where I was January of 2019 and earlier. Before we bring on our guest, I have a few people have joined us, and I will introduce them in the comments, and we'll start with Sean. Sean, how are you? He says, my lunch break just started, and so is this stream, so it's destiny. Sean, it's always destiny that you join us for the Venture Forward, and we're appreciative that you are here with us tonight. Jane, how are you? Hope you're doing well. Glad you're here too. And Merck, what's up with you? Hope you're doing well on this wonderful Thursday evening, Thursday, December 3rd. And on that, let's bring on the guest. Our guest tonight is a lady by the name of Ashley Blake, and she has seen a lot of stories with respect to this, and it is an honor and pleasure to have you on the show tonight.
Thank you, John. I'm very happy to be here.
I wanted to start, at least your perspective on this. From one, what have you seen from your own self as far as how you're dealing with this phenomenon, this pandemic, this COVID, I mean, this craziness that 2020 has been? How have you felt that for yourself? But moreover, what have you seen in the work that you do? And I guess I should also say, what do you do? My mind's all over the place.
Let's start with what I do.
Yes, okay. That's right.
I am an outpatient therapist. I focus in addictions, as well as some mental health work in central Pennsylvania. And I've watched this year completely change what it means to be a mental health professional. I've seen it change what it means to be in recovery. And unfortunately, I've seen it lead to a lot of deaths.
That's I think the thing I think people seem to forget when we start talking about the death toll and the fatalities of this pandemic is they seem to forget the things that don't necessarily have an ICD-11 that's tied to the pandemic itself, but rather the mental health piece, the stressors, the depression and whatnot. I'm sorry you're dealing with that. I'm sorry you see that so often.
I mean, what we're dealing with is all of us are going through a trauma right now. Living through a pandemic is something that is new to all of us. If we started kind of calling it in the field CPTSD, COVID PTSD, it's not a real diagnosis, but we're all starting to exhibit those symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. Mm-hmm. And for those individuals who really do have PTSD, this is compounding their issues.
I know that when you think about the term CPTSD well before 2020, people referred to CPTSD as complex post-traumatic stress disorder. Do you find nuances of complex PTSD waning its way into a COVID-related PTSD?
So when we're looking at complex PTSD versus COVID PTSD, where it comes into play is for those who have faced significant traumas prior to the pandemic. So there are some individuals that had a pretty more simplified form of PTSD that is now becoming more complex because this pandemic's not over. So it's an ongoing trauma, which is really difficult for anyone to deal with. Add to that mental illness and substance use disorder, and it's detrimental and terrifying.
I can only imagine the sort of stories and sort of, I guess, concerns that many of the people you treat come to you every day with, as far as not only their natural addictions, but also this sort of added nuance about being quarantined, or their way of life changing, or problem, or situations with their family and friends that might be COVID related.
Hmm.
What has resonated to you as the more likely cause of someone relapsing?
The biggest cause of relapse right now is lack of social interaction and social support. With most of the 12-step meetings going to online only, a lot of people just completely gave up on it. Um, a lot of people don't like telemedicine, so they gave up on telehealth groups, like telehealth IOP groups. And as that happened, the overdose rates have spiked, um, suicide rates have spiked, and I don't see it improving anytime soon, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think I was reading something the other day, and I'm sorry I don't have this up on Still Store to bring it up, but it was something like the sort of rate of depression, and also rate of suicide related sort of nuance to that of relapse of addiction was like in the 30s before all this began, and then spiked to like 50, 60 some odd percent. And that was,
Yeah.
I think it was Kaiser Health with that number.
Yeah, I think those are Kaiser's statistics from about September. Um, it's getting worse. Uh, one of the things I do every day is I check the obituary and I go through my client list, former clients, just to see who passed away today. And it's almost always an overdose or a
Mm,
suicide. And some of these
yeah.
people are people who I've known have been in recovery for years, and it's sad.
Do you find that along this way with what the pandemic has brought to such a unique sector, in that of those that are battling addiction, whether it's alcoholism or narcotics or overeating or whatever, you know, what what sort of warning signs do you see becoming prevalent outside of the classical warning signs of relapse? What other warning signs do people like yourself see amongst the people that you treat, that something is going to go the other way?
Increased isolation is the biggest one, and here we are being told to isolate.
Mm-hmm.
But increased isolation is a hallmark of relapse. Um, an increase in boredom, a decrease in goal-directed activity. The minute you start putting those three things together, relapse becomes almost inevitable,
Mm-hmm.
unfortunately.
Yeah, I have a few friends in my life who are going through a struggle or two, and you look at this. If this was a normal world, I mean, what a phrase, right? If this was a normal world, there is nothing normal about this world. Talk about this as being the new normal, right? This is recovery in the new normal, because this is sort of the things that we're dealing with. But it's amazing that even those that are well into the road of recovery have a relapse, because they're under so much stress, whether it is their own, as you said, boredom, isolation, or whatnot, or things that are going on in their own personal life amongst their friends, their family, or whatnot, that causes them to crack, causes them to relapse.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. I've seen individuals with 20, 30 years relapse during this pandemic. Um, People that you're certain have it all together, and you change the world the day COVID came into play, and unfortunately, their recovery wasn't prepared for that change.
Right, right. Got some comments floating in. Um, hey Sherry, how are you? Glad you're here. Christina, Good evening to you. Good evening, John. Bless you and Ashley for all that you do. You are a true hero. Thanks. Ashley, I could not agree any more than that. You are truly a hero, and I'm glad you're here tonight, Ash. Sarah says, sorry I'm late. Sean says, Ashley, that breaks my heart about the checking the obituaries. I mean, how how often do you see that?
Looking at kind of my clients and my colleagues' clients and our past clients, we're averaging probably 2 to 3 individuals that we've seen in the past in a week dying. We're seeing numbers of overdoses exceeding what was the height of the opioid epidemic. And unfortunately, we're not talking about this because we're
Mm-mm.
so focused on COVID and COVID deaths.
Right. Um, and you were alluding to before that there isn't any specific diagnosis code, any specific HICPIC code or ICD-11 code that ties to the mental effects of what this pandemic has brought to people when they've had a mental health emergency.
I mean, when the pandemic started, you could say we all had an adjustment disorder,
Mm-hmm.
right? There is an ICD-10, ICD-11 for adjustment disorder. It exists in the DSM-5. However, an adjustment disorder only lasts 6 months. We've exceeded 6 months with COVID. There's nothing really to define what this is.
Mm-hmm. It's I think the other thing is, and not necessarily the line of thinking I was prepping to go down, but I think I'll throw it down for a second, is just the amount of misinformation that's out there across the various news sources and whatnot, and trying to identify exactly what's going on. And of course, everybody knows, especially this audience, that the science is growing because we've never seen this sort of thing, right? We know what SARS was back 10 years ago, but what we're seeing now is beyond that. It's an incredible number, but I also I also see a lot of people just floating a lot of questionable information and passing it as gospel.
It's unfortunate. I blame social media for a lot of that. One of the things I started telling people early on in this pandemic is stop looking at Facebook. Just stop, because it was causing more harm than good.
Mm, mm. It's incredible. I'm glad people are watching on YouTube or Facebook to this particular broadcast. This is important, but you just I think the thing I've told family before is become more prudent and more careful of consumers of information before you just start spreading them as the town crier would have done in the 1700s. Be more judicious about how you get your information before you start spreading it.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, Paul says, "Hello, I'm glad I'm able to catch this live. Paul, glad to see you." Sarah says that is so sad.
Yeah.
Sherry with the Share Squad, glad you. This is definitely part of the Share Squad for sure. Christina says, "One of my dearest friends died of oxycodone addiction overdose. She was in her 30s, just got married. She asked me for a prescription, and I didn't do it. I asked her to get help. I felt so helpless."
Yeah, that's the thing. Even as therapists, we feel helpless in these kind of situations. Um, we do our best. Um, I try to get people into rehab. Guess what? A lot of them have closed. Try to get people into detox. Guess what? A lot of them have closed because of the pandemic. And it's heartbreaking. And we're seeing people overdose, people that prior to the pandemic, we could have gotten them help. I'm even watching where I practice, one of the biggest drug and alcohol outpatient programs there, bigger than the one I work in, is closing in a few days.
It's you look at situations like that, and you kind of ask yourself, when along the way did we become so reckless about mental health in our country. I think it becomes evidently clear that in times like these, mental health is more important than ever before. And the idea of shutting down those sort of centers, shutting down those sort of facilities, it's mind blowing.
It is, and we have a shortage in this country of mental health professionals. At this point, me and my colleagues, we're taking on caseloads that are double our normal size, trying to help everybody because of the shortage. And it takes a toll on us too, of course. Uh, but we do this because we care.
Right.
But yeah, as things close, I can't keep taking on more people. It's not
Okay.
possible.
Sarah raised a couple of quick points I want to bring up. Going back to information consumption, she said, I think it's good advice for everyone. I agree. I think we have to be very careful on how we consume information for sure, Sarah. And then she had a question. Is this being tracked in any kind of formal way?
To a certain extent, overdoses and suicides get tracked through coroner's reports. So that is the way to get the statistics at a local level. And then Kaiser has been compiling them every month nationwide to look at the increases.
Mm. Sarah goes on and says, "Oh, we've been reckless about mental health for a long time. We split off mental and physical health, which is the first mistake. I don't mean that in terms of treatment, just analysis."
I wholeheartedly agree with you, Sarah. We treat mental health like it's a second class in terms of health, but our mental health and physical health are very much intertwined, so we can't neglect them.
Mm. There's a lot of neglect going on there, and I think the moment that we start making part of our public vernacular, especially when it comes to health, that mental health and physical health are intertwined, and we start treating both equally as important, which is should be paramount. I think we turn a corner. Does that change in a change of administration and policy? Maybe. Who knows? But there's been such a serious lack of that sort of dichotomy between physical health and mental health.
It doesn't help that we still have so much stigma in this country about mental health. This idea of being crazy.
Mm.
Um, Hate that word. There's no such thing. It's nowhere in the DSM-5, people. Um, but we did that long ago, and we also have to struggle with the fact that the insurance companies don't like paying for mental health, and they like to put limits on it, and that's a real problem.
Can you talk quick? I mean, high level, obviously, as safely as you can. Can you
Yeah.
talk to some of the difficulty that you've been experiencing with health insurers and mental health?
So when it comes to the insurance companies, they enjoy auditing our notes. They get annoyed if you cover the same topic more than once and decide they don't want to pay. It's a fight, especially for drug and alcohol treatment. If somebody needs intensive outpatient, I will fight for hours on end talking to every person at the insurance company to get it approved, just for them to go like, we approve 4 sessions. Well, 4 sessions is a week and one day. That's not helpful.
Do they provide any sort of guidance on why they made such a decision, or is it just a blanket sort of decision? We're going to provide 4 treatments. That's it.
Yeah, they don't provide anything with that, unfortunately. It's just the way they operate, with the hope that they won't have to pay out a lot of money.
Hmm. Couple comments from Marilyn. Marilyn says, "Good afternoon, everyone," and then Marilyn goes on and says, "Thank you for your service, Ashley. You will be in my thoughts and prayers."
Thanks, Marilyn. I appreciate it. All of us in the mental health field, we appreciate it.
Sarah had a thought before, and I wanted to get your sense on this. Sarah says, "It makes me think of all the increase in domestic violence."
Most definitely. So we have a domestic violence problem in this country as it is. About 1 in 4 women are the victims of domestic violence. Men, it's about 1 in 10. Um, and then here we are taking people who probably shouldn't be together and forcing them to stay home together all the time. I've seen an increase in domestic violence being reported amongst my clients. And I've also then seen the difficulty too of trying to get somebody into a domestic violence shelter when they're asking for a COVID test before they can come. That becomes a problem because your goal with getting somebody into a shelter is to get them out of their home safely, and anything that raises red flags, like getting a COVID test for no reason, can prevent that from happening.
It's incredible. It's when you have so many things going on at the same time and trying to figure out what is the most obviously the pandemic, but there are so many other things that could be just as much detrimental to the family unit that they need the same sort of level of concern and care.
And unfortunately, those things aren't happening. Reports to children and youth, child protective services, whatever you call it in your state, those reports are way down and they shouldn't be. That's a problem. We know just from this that there's an increase in child abuse going on that's going unreported because the number one reporters of child abuse are teachers. And when kids aren't physically in a classroom and they're doing school from home with their abusers right there, it's going unreported.
To that end, somewhat related, Sarah says we need to start giving people the tools for physical and mental health in elementary school, maybe even younger.
These things start at a very young age. We have to be open and honest about physical health and mental health, even with the little kiddos. You know, my friend who has a son in preschool, their preschool does yoga. It makes me so happy. They do yoga, they do meditation. You know, I'm amazed that they can get 4 and 5 year olds to sit still for 5 minutes, but they do.
How do you get a 5-year-old to do a downward dog? I'm trying to wrap my mind around the logistics of that for a second. How is that possible?
Well, they enjoy it. That's the thing. Kids at that age are willing to try something new, and something as silly as downward dog makes them happy.
There's definitely a bright side to that, and if we could teach kids how to find that sort of sense of relaxation, but also mental sort of centrality through yoga, through meditation, we're doing the next generation such a service there. It's incredible. Christina says, just make sure, Ashley, that you take care of yourself. Self help for health professionals like us is paramount.
Oh, it definitely is. And, you know, as anybody in the health profession right now knows, we're all kind of neglecting it a little bit because we're all overworked at the moment. But you're right. And we all need to take care of ourselves.
Sarah raised a point from before and says, yes, stigma, I've dealt with that for a long, long time. It's amazing what stigma will do to any sort of conversation, any sort of business dealing, any sort of friendship deal, whatever it is. Stigma is such a tough word.
It is a tough word. I spend a lot of my professional career fighting against it, whether it be with my own clients labeling themselves as crazy, or it being other members of the community and educating them further. We have to take away the stigma. We don't have stigma against cancer. Why do we have stigma against depression or bipolar disorder? They're just diseases.
Yeah, I part of my thought there is because it's more qualitative in nature as far as how one deals with treating mental health, trying to treat neuroses, addiction, bipolar, this, that, or the other thing, right? That I think it gets shied away a bit, but that's no excuse. And especially in this day and age where we know so much more about the people we treat, the people we see, the people that we provide assistance to. There's really no excuse for that.
No, there isn't. And, one of the things I've actively tried to do is in my own regular language, not say the word crazy,
Mm.
right? Because we do it. It may not be related to anything mental health wise, but we say that word. So I tried to pull that away. And I tried to educate people about what mental illness really is, what addiction really is, um, how something like depression is not just in the head. Depression has physical effects, exhaustion, muscle pain, chronic pain.
Right.
Those are symptoms of depression too.
It's amazing, actually, that when I started going to school back in '95, and just a general science degree, how biobehavioral health back 25 years ago was starting to become one of these sort of new sort of topics that is like, well, we're not really sure if we could talk about that sort of thing, and yet we're going to start talking about the mental health connection with physical health. It's almost somewhat relieving that we're going down that road a bit more, but yet there's still a big sort of difference between physical health, mental health, and then just the mismatch between the two, or at least treating the two.
Well, I think part of this is integrative medicine. There aren't many physicians practicing integrative medicine or holistic integrative medicine to take it one step further. We need more doing that. It's hard to get the old school in the medical community on board with that. And then there's also a huge shortage of psychiatrists in this country,
Mm.
which is causing a significant problem and leading to more PCPs trying to handle mental health.
What is from what you've been seeing? What is sort of the I guess heuristic skill mismatch between a PCP trying to treat their patient's mental health versus just basically referring them to a psychiatrist that there are not many of right now because of everything that's going on. What's the sort of mismatch that you've been seeing?
Well, PCPs, love them. We need them, right? They're general medicine. They're not specialist. You go in with strep throat, you're good. You go in with a sleep issue, you might be okay. You go in with schizophrenia, good luck. Good luck with them even diagnosing it. They can diagnose depression, they can diagnose anxiety. Beyond that, you're not going to have the best of care because it's not their specialty.
Right. It goes to the point where there are a lot of people in mental health right now that are doing things that are not in their skill set. And it goes to what Sarah's next comment is that it's so crazy. What a waste of your time and skills to deal with insurance companies. Basically,
Yeah,
clerical, administrative stuff, that degree.
yeah, but the insurance companies want to actually hear from the therapist why this person needs whatever you want them to have. It gets even harder if you feel somebody needs a higher level of care than that. So, like if I recommend that somebody really needs to go to detox because of what's going on, that's a several hours fight, and me justifying every bit of my notes and every question I ask somebody, to ensure that they get the help that they need.
Mm-hmm. Sarah also says, again, it's because we split off physical, mental, and emotional illness. Two different worlds.
Yeah.
The more we learn about the brain, the less we should be splitting these things apart.
That's correct. I mean, our brain controls everything in our body. So it's all rooted in the brain.
Mm.
Physical pain goes to the nerves in the brain. Mental illness, also the brain.
All the central nervous system.
The whole central nervous system. So anything related to the central nervous system, brain.
Right. Marilyn had a comment before when we were talking about toddler yoga. Kids want to please their teacher.
Yes, there's that too. And kids like to giggle, and there's nothing quite as funny as seeing little kids trying to do downward dog.
Good evening, Alan. Hope you're doing well. And then we have our friend from Australia, Des. Good evening to you, or good morning to you. It's evening here. It's time difference. Um, I guess my next question for you, Ashley, is as we go forward, and they're talking about vaccinations, and there are four leading vaccinations right now that might be making the cut sometime this month. What, in your mindset, if we had to come up with what the appropriate sort of guideline is for vaccine deployment, herd immunity, what's your thought on that sort of thing?
Okay, I'm definitely not an expert in this, and I'm not an epidemiologist, but you know, I am pro-vaccine. I'll put that out there. I'm
Mm-hmm.
pro-vaccine in general. We need to protect our healthcare workers first and foremost, um, and then to get away from telehealth everything, you know, and masks all the time. We need to deploy this in a healthy, rational way, looking at our highest risk people first,
Mm-hmm.
and going downwards from there. My fear here is that a good percentage of people won't get the vaccine
Right.
because of our beliefs in parts of the society about vaccines and about COVID in general. And that is going to still cause problems.
Right. I mean, what's the number? Was it 70% for herd immunity, something like that?
I think 70 is what's needed to be considered herd immunity, but you really want like 90,
Mm-hmm.
because numbers at 70. I think that's where measles is getting down to, and now we're having measles outbreaks again. So
It almost seems like there's a major miseducation about the importance of vaccination with diseases that were epidemics, pandemics, what have you. You mentioned measles, and then I'm sure you could probably throw polio in that boat too, and others. It's scary to think that they might be a problem again because people are not doing their due diligence to get the right antibodies or the right sort of level of vaccination against it.
I mean, it comes down to a lot of miseducation that is out there about vaccines. A study on autism that was retracted completely, still being held as gospel, and parts of our society no longer believing in science.
Mm. It's it's very and the reason why I can't come up with it's just really frightening to think that in 2020, 2019, that we're absolutely in a place right now where questions about vaccination, questions about public health and treating the masses has become front and center because we've been so lax about it or have had such a change in mental mindset or policy mindset, rather, to try to treat these things.
Oh, I agree. I mean, there was a time it was like, okay, it's time for your kids' shots. You just wait, you did it, the end. Now it's this long debate, and, you know, parents fighting with schools to let their kids in because they're not vaccinated. And unfortunately, I feel the same thing's going to happen with the COVID vaccines.
Mm. I hope there's a more of a come to understanding across our society, whether it's the society we have here in the States or the global sort of outlook as far as how we look at these sort of things and try to do things that are better for everybody, for the population en masse, and not just yourself or what's going on in your street corner, but having more of a global look at all of it. I think the thing that's scary, Ashley, is I remember, I forget whether I was at a restaurant or hanging out at a coffee shop back in February, and they were talking about the onslaught of COVID in China and in Europe and whatnot, and how many people just they were concerned, but not the level of concern that we're certainly feeling now, for sure. And how that quickly spiraled and escalated to something that I don't think anyone could have ever imagined that COVID could do that sort of thing. I don't know what your take on that is.
No, I don't think any of us were prepared for this to really be this massive pandemic. Um, the United States has been shielded from these things for a long time. You've mentioned SARS before. Well, SARS was not a state's problem, so we didn't have to think about it that much. Um, but I know even my own work, when COVID first started, it was okay, we'll see what it's like in a week, right? Well, we'll make some, we'll just do telehealth for a week, no big deal. And then suddenly it's okay, nobody's coming in. And then it was losing track of people and technology issues and this onslaught of anxiety amongst the masses, and thus resulting in an onslaught of new clients as well.
I think the sort of lessons we learned as far as the importance of contact tracing and also understanding more or less how important electronic health records are as far as figuring out what everybody is as far as their level of protection, their level of comorbidity. I mean, that really had to be expelled. That really had to accelerate really quickly in the last 9, 10 months.
We've made advances in the medical field that normally wouldn't happen in such a short time frame. We, in mental health, we've had to completely change how we practice. We've had to change what it means to run a drug and alcohol group, to run an intensive outpatient group. We've changed what it means to have a DBT skills group. These things were always done in person. Well, we can't put people in groups in person anymore. It's not safe. But by moving to telehealth, we lost a lot of people in the process, be it to technology, to money,
Yeah,
to a loss of human connection.
big time. I think one of the things we talked about on the very first episode of the Venture Forward, we talked about how AA and NA and all those addiction groups that would meet in person, multiple weekly meetings, and working recovery from that angle, the 12 steps, all of that, how they were basically shut down and moved virtually, and how there was probably a really big drop off. There's the stark side. The flip side of that is, if it wasn't for that very fact, I wouldn't have known the recovery groups I know now, because I joined these this year. I reached out and realized, if I'm going to stay sober for the rest of my life, I need to do something about it. But I am got to do something about it in a time where there are no AA meetings, at least back in the early part of the year. And I need to really go inside and figure out, how do I fix this? And I'm sure there's some folks, especially some in this room, have gone through that sort of mindset. But then the flip of that is realizing that we really have to be back in person to form that community, that form that support network, even if the chairs are, I don't know, 6 feet away. How did that 6 feet number come into play, by the way? I don't know. But there needs to be more in person, for sure. That's how we all gravitate that support network.
Well, yeah, I mean, the online communities are great. They've helped a lot of people enter into recovery recently too, because a lot of people discovered when they shut down the bars and liquor stores that they were alcoholics. So, yeah, it was great that we had that as a resource. But for those who have longer in recovery and come from that person-centered approach to recovery, not having that in-person community has been a precursor to relapse for a lot of them.
Yeah, it's scary, and I know that You can never take the next day as a guarantee. You always have to work your program, work your way of thinking, work your battle over addiction every day, even if you have 2 years, 4 years, 6 years, 20, whatever. It's an ongoing battle, and I've seen firsthand a couple of stories that these are people you never thought it would happen to, and yet it's happening to them. We got to stay on top of that. Sarah says, we've destroyed the public education system in this country, so science, critical thinking, civics, media literacy aren't taught.
Yeah, you're right, Sarah. We've turned this into a society that focuses on a standardized test and not so much civics. Even my own high school didn't have civics. It's the truth, they didn't. And I went to one of the best high schools in Pennsylvania. We did not have civics.
Des telling everybody, it's not just America. Australia is the same. A lot of lounge chair experts.
I think that's kind of become the norm because the internet and social media has given everybody a voice, and that means they've also given people who know nothing about topics a voice as well, and they all herald themselves as experts.
Yeah, it's amazing how much of that comes to the forefront. But I think the people that are doing it, that are open to learning, and are coming about it from an area of education, and realizing that their story point is always going to be agile, and they're going to change their story as they learn more. That's a thing. Being able to course correct and refine the story, refine your understanding as you learn more. That's key. When you become set in your ways and you don't do that, that becomes a problem.
Most definitely. Extreme stubbornness. It's a bad thing.
Sean says, I can say from firsthand experience that this pandemic has made dealing with addiction and anxiety even more challenging.
Yeah, Sean, it has. And I feel for you. I feel for everyone out there trying to cope with recovery and any mental health issues. This pandemic has made it so much worse. The constant anxiety inducing numbers that are put out there.
Mm.
It's a daily wake up of how many died today.
Do you find, Ashley, that you consume as much news as you used to, or do you find that you're very careful about what news you come across? I know for me, I'm very selective these days.
Me as well. Honestly, I've been sticking to my local newspaper of all things to look at what are the statistics where I live and is there any happy news going on?
Yes. Happy news would be fantastic. It's so doom and gloom, and you get afraid. I remember a world where we would watch CNN and all the major cable news channels or the nightly news, and be okay with watching them, and now I'm afraid of touching them with a 100-foot pole. It's scary.
Mm-hmm.
Sarah says, do you think if people knew the actual history of the Spanish flu pandemic, they wouldn't behave so insanely about COVID?
Unfortunately, because we have so many people who like to tout the phrase fake news, even giving them the actual history, they're not necessarily going to believe it.
Mm-mm. Marilyn agrees with Sarah and says, I believe all should go back and look at the Spanish flu history, uh, even worse than that.
Yeah, the Spanish flu was detrimental. And it's history that most of us have forgotten. Most of us weren't even taught about it in school. And unfortunately, I don't think most people care to learn.
Good morning, Ob. Ob's also from Australia. Hope you're doing well. Sarah says, I think that's why the venture forward is so important, Sarah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Um, I'm trying to do this, trying to pass the message as far as, how you overcome the roadblocks that stood in your way. And this is definitely the greatest roadblock we've ever seen in our generation and generations before that and generations before that. And that's why I feel this is so important. I'm so pleased and honored to do this. I mean, I just and I'm pleased and honored for people like you too, Sarah, joining us every episode and being a part of this. Muchly appreciated. Um, Marilyn says, and it was devastating that we're in for the worst yet.
It is. And this holiday season with people traveling, it is only increasing our numbers.
Sue says, I think we need to remember we can do it. And I think that the thing is we need to remember that there are ways around us. We can take common sense and the things that have been asked for us to do and just abide by it for a little while and see if we can move those numbers down.
Yeah. Um, we need to follow the CDC recommendations. Those of you who can stay home, stay home. I don't have that privilege because of some of the clientele I work with. But if I could do 100% telemedicine right now, I would.
That's a very interesting question because there's a situation right now where we obviously have to keep distance. We have to basically do social distancing. We have to quarantine if we feel symptoms, yada yada yada. How does that transcend to the work that you do, Ashley? I mean, when there's situations where the law is basically asking folks to see you for whatever, how does that work into the logic?
It gets very complicated. I work with a lot of people who are mandated into treatment. Their probation officers, their parole officers want them seen in person. And so I have to be there in person, you know, and put myself at risk every day. It's resulted in me finagling furniture in my office. I often double mask and face shield because I have a lot of clients who either due to health issues can't wear a mask or they're anti-maskers,
Mm.
you know, and it frustrates me.
Hmm.
But because I care about the work that I do, I put myself out there on the line every day.
Ashley, I'm going to basically repeat something that's been said a few times in the comments, and I want to really thank you for the work that you do now more than ever. It's so important what you're doing, and I know I'm very appreciative for the work that you do, but everybody in this audience is too. I just wanted to get there are more comments, but I had to tell you that right now for sure. Um, good to see you. You got out of your slump. I hope your slump didn't hold you back too much. I hope you're being the consummate Ob that I know. And Ob, if anything, Ashley, I'll tell you this: Ob is an incredible personality and someone who knows the story of recovery and is such an inspiration to many people in this group, especially myself. So, Ob, I'm glad you're out of your slump. I'm glad you're here tonight for sure. Um, Ob also says, I don't wear a tin hat. Human distancing started since the mobile phone epidemic. With a wink.
A little bit, yes, yes, yes. The best thing is to watch a group of teenagers in a room where none of them talk because they're all texting each other.
Trying to provide information. Why you have to text? Moreover, why did I feel the need to do the BlackBerry version of that, where there hasn't been physical buttons on phones for God knows how long? Sue says, I work in a nursing home. It's tough.
Bless you, Sue. You're a hero.
Very much so, Sue. Sarah says, I'd love to see hospital workers telling their stories in their own locales as public service messages all over the media. Not heavy handed telling people what to do, just their own stories.
I think that would be a great idea. Part of the problem is we're all busy working extra hours. Um, they just announced in the area where I work that due to COVID hitting staffs in the hospitals, the staff is like insanely short at the biggest hospital in the county. So
Uh,
there's no way to even tell these stories because people are going to be doing 16-hour shifts every day.
it's not, if I remember correctly, not only one of the biggest hospitals in the county, but the entire Commonwealth.
Yes, it is one of the largest hospitals in the Commonwealth. Yeah.
And then Ob says, he goes back to this again, have to put it up. Imagine removing the mobile phones from everyone.
It's funny. Actually, at my job, we were all challenged by a member of leadership to lock our cell phones away in our car trunks for the weekend. Most people started suffering from cell phone withdrawal. Not a real thing, but yeah, me
I'm
included.
surprised. I'm surprised there isn't some sort of DSM or ICD-9 code for electronic communication withdrawal.
That'll be in the DSM-6, I'm
Okay.
sure. They started working on the 5 before cell phones proliferated society.
Let's see. Marilyn says, "Amen, JV. Aubrey is an inspiration to all." Marilyn, you couldn't have said it better. He is, absolutely is. And Sarah says, "Tech Sabbath is a wonderful thing." I don't think Sarah's referring to Ozzy, but if you are, great. No, Tech Sabbath is definitely a wonderful thing for sure.
It is a wonderful thing. We should all practice it.
Yeah, I mean, there are times now, Ashley, where if my phone doesn't charge overnight, I'm absolutely okay with that. It's like, you know what? I don't really need the cell phone alarm going off. I don't need to be bothered by one other thing. There's just so many things going on.
Yeah, I turned off all of my alerts.
It's man.
It's amazing. You turn them all off. You don't look at your phone 5,000 times a day.
You know it's funny? I'm just going back about 10 years here. But and I mentioned it like earlier about the BlackBerry. I used to have a BlackBerry. I needed to get a BlackBerry for my job back when I was working in a Fortune 100. And I remember how tied I was to the BlackBerry, and I remember going out to dinner or going to a lunch or whatnot, and not being a really good guest to have a meal with because every 5 seconds I'm back on answering another business email or doing this and that and the other thing, and like I remember getting ribbed about that with a dear friend of mine. It's like, could you put the phone away? Could you put the phone away for an hour and a half? Now, mind you, this is back in 2011, 2010. And now if you turn the clock back to now, or at least to 2019, the last time I saw her for dinner, she was the one that was on the phone all the time. And I was so compelled to say something. Put it away. That's what you told me back in 2010. But the times are different, of course. But
No, but we've kind of lost that ability to enjoy a meal together. I'm a big proponent. If I go out to eat, my phone does not leave my purse. I will call other people out for using their phone.
I might have done that too in the last few weeks myself. Uh, Dad says, I worked a job. If you used a mobile phone, you were sacked on the spot.
Yeah, there are a lot of companies that actually do that because cell phones decrease productivity. Um, so especially warehouse work, factory work. I even worked a government job where we weren't allowed to have our cell phones out the entire shift.
It's amazing how tied we are to such devices. And I guess going back to what we're talking about, in that we're getting information from so many different places. Some of the information may be factual. Some of the information may be contrived. Some of the information might be half truth or whatnot. it's amazing how much of that information comes to us, but there's times where we have to shut it off.
We do. The brain was not meant to process constant information. We were not meant to have our brain actively reading and responding all day long. And that's what's happening. We get a message, we respond immediately. We see a news alert, we're responding immediately. We're scrolling Facebook for hours on end. We're tweeting and retweeting.
Hmm. It's if we talk about what this year has brought us, and we call this the new normal, as much as I hate that phrase, but I hope that there are things even to like, well, I've really spent too much time on a phone, or I can be reading, or I could be doing this, or I could be working on a lot of other projects that I never thought of if you turn back the clock 12 months ago. And I really hope there's some sort of, dare I say, renaissance from this, becoming more to ourselves and more introspective and understanding what we want to do in life.
I do see introspection happening, right?
Hmm.
Because COVID forced us to slow down at the beginning of the year. We were forced to slow down. Unless you were in healthcare, then you were forced to speed up drastically. But for most of society, you got to slow down for a minute. And I think one of the favorite things that I've seen is that 24-hour stores are kind of no longer a thing. Walmart's
Yeah.
not open 24 hours anymore. And you know what? That hasn't changed my life at all. So maybe it doesn't ever need to go back.
No, I think we at least from maybe the most basic of forms, we got a little bit of humanity back. How much of that humanity is going to stick after this? Whenever things start working, who knows? But it's good to see it working to a certain degree for sure. Sarah says we relate to devices like any other substance or behavioral addiction.
Yes. And actually, whenever I do an intake for a drug and alcohol client, I always ask about other addictions, and technology being one of them, social media, internet use, video games. That's all part of my spread of questions I ask.
Mm. Ob has a comment. Best thing came out of 2020 was AC/DC's album called Power Up. So obviously, someone from Australia is big on the Akadaka. So he's going to talk about Power Up for sure. Um, I wanted to give you a couple minutes, even a minute, if you had any final thoughts or any sort of ideas about where you think this is going as far as how we treat those that are battling addiction in this really strange time that we're living in, and then moreover, what are some of your thoughts about how we move forward from this to a better place, a venture forward to a much healthier place?
When it comes to addiction and recovery right now, we have to be a little more creative. Um, those in the field have to be more creative. Um, we also have to start to recognize in each other the signs that relapse is coming. Relapse starts 6 months before any substance is used. Um, so, we have to kind of get honest about behaviors.
Mm.
And, when we're not seeing people in person, it's harder to recognize those things. So we have to get better with our questions. The questions, professionals to their patients, but also our questions to our friends and our family.
What not to put you on the spot. I mean, what are a couple of those questions that you would ask to make sure that people are at least taking good care of themselves? But then if the answers are not good, I mean, what are the warning signs from? Obviously, a longer list, but just a couple of
Yeah.
those questions.
Some of those questions. When's the last time you went to a meeting? When's the last time you took your meds? When's the last time you ate? Um, that's a common one with both mental illness and addiction, not eating. very, very common. And with people not going out to the grocery store and stuff as much, less food in the house.
Mm.
Yeah. So those are kind of the sort of clinical ones. But, asking, how are you? And then when they say, I'm fine, you go, no, really, how are you?
Right. Hearing the words, hearing the meaning underneath those words, and then asking for more information when you know something is not right.
Yes, I'm fine does not mean fine.
No. Sarah says, wow, I didn't know that about relapse. Then she asks, what kind of things are cues that someone might be headed to a relapse?
So watching changes in sort of general behavior. So if there's somebody who regularly attends meetings and they stop going, any decrease in goal-directed behavior, um, things like not going to work, right?
Hmm.
Especially somebody who never takes a day off, suddenly taking a day off here, taking a day off there. Um, Noticing behaviors that you saw when they were in active addiction. And that really requires some intense, looking back in your own memories to recognize what behaviors were going on, because it's the behaviors. But the biggest cue is lying about really stupid things
Mm.
nobody needs to lie about. That's a really common one.
So the lack of transparency and the increase of just being not truthful.
Yeah,
Alan says relapse mode definitely can happen well before a person picks up.
exactly. Exactly. The term dry drunk, right?
Mm.
Somebody who's abstinent from a substance but still acts like an addict.
There are a lot of people that don't understand that term of dry drunk, and I'm glad you gave a quick definition of what that is, because if not a full fledged relapse is it's making itself known, just the idea of being a dry drunk or being a dry addict can definitely make itself known, especially in a time like this.
Most definitely. People have let their mental health and their self care slide. And I'm seeing more of this behavior, the dry drunk behavior.
Mm. Mm. And then Aubrey has one more. Dry drunk is someone who lives and acts like an alcoholic but not drinking.
Exactly.
Ashley, it's been an honor and pleasure having you on the show tonight. I think, given the very strange time we're living in, and also being front and center about one, we're recovering. We're in my case, I'm an addict of three different things, but I'm trying to do the best I can, but also trying to deal with all these additional sort of biobehavioral nuances, and also dealing with this sort of social nuances, this and the other thing. I'm really glad you're able to spend time with us this evening to talk about it.
I was honored to be here, John.
Ashley, thank you very much. And by all means, I hope to have you on the show again sometime soon. You're phenomenal. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ashley Blake, ladies and gentlemen, just an incredible person. I wanted just to bring this graphic up once more in where you can turn to as far as getting the help you need if you're dealing with mental health or you're dealing with a suicide crisis or whatnot. SAMHSA at 1-800-662-4357. Again, 1-800-662-4357, or at samhsa.gov, or the Suicide Prevention Lifeline at 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-8255. You can also reach them by texting the word HOME to 741-741. That's HOME at 741-741. And on that, I just want to put out a quick reminder that we will be doing VF Talks tomorrow night at 5:15 Eastern, 2:15 Pacific. Topics about anything, conversation where sometimes it's on the rails and sometimes it's not. And we'll figure out what goes on tomorrow. But looking forward to seeing all of you tomorrow night for sure. So is a certain stuffed triceratops that's hiding somewhere in here. And on that, I'm going to remind you the same thing I remind you on every venture forward. Stay safe, stay sane, stay strong, stay sober. You're worth it. We'll see you again tomorrow night at 5:15 Eastern, 2:15 Pacific. Good night.